Hello friends, my name is Bintou and welcome back to my channel. So as we get closer and closer to the end of 2020, I've been reflecting a lot on all of the books that I read this year. And I read a ton of books this year, way more than I've read in any other year. And one of the things I want to talk about this month is what are some of the worst books that I read in 2020? Overall, I will say that I enjoyed the majority of the books that I read. And there were really only like 2 or 3 that I can say were completely awful, and one that I just completely DNF'd. But overall, a very strong reading year. I liked almost all of the books that I read. So now let's talk about the ones that I didn't. Number 1 on that list is Nevernight by J. Kristoff. I didn't even finish this book. I got somewhere to I feel like I got a third of the way through, 33% mark maybe. I know that I got decently far. And I reached a point in the book where I had to admit to myself that I absolutely hated the writing, and I had to just stop. I do tend to push through, and you'll notice that this is the only book that I DNF'd. All the other books on this list I actually did finish. So I have a tendency to push through books if I've started them, because I do fall to the sunk cost fallacy. And I also have high hopes that the book will turn around, and it usually doesn't. So I probably should listen to myself more about DNFing these books. But my problem with Nevernight was the writing. I did not like his writing style. And I don't think I've encountered, in all the books that I read this year, I don't think I have encountered a writing style that I just didn't mesh with as much as I did with J. Kristoff's writing style in Nevernight. And it was really too bad, because I did enjoy the premise of the book. So I liked the idea of, there's this girl, she's training, she's gonna be like a real butt kicker, and she's super strong. She's gonna go fight people, fend for herself, and all that jazz. And even some of the elements of the fantasy I found really fascinating. I liked learning about the world in the fantasy books that I read. Even though it's not a genre I read often, I still like reading that. When it all came together, the way that he was writing, I couldn't stand it. And if I remember correctly, there were like some sexual scenes in there too that just made me very uncomfortable, or they were just so cringy. I don't know. This one was by far, just takes the cake. This was the #1 worst book that I read in 2020. It was the only book of the 100+ books that I read this year that I legit DNF'd and just like gave up on completely. And that is saying a lot. All right, number 2 on that list is Such a Fun Age. And I feel like I'm gonna get a lot of slack for this one, because I know that a lot of people really did like this book, but I did not like Such a Fun Age. I felt like as I was reading the book, I was wondering, what is the point? Like, there were just things that were happening, but there was no real rhyme or reason. There was no plot driving the book. And I understand that it was meant to be like this commentary, but I think it fell flat. For one, I didn't like the characters. I didn't really care about the characters. And it could be, I think that I struggle with the third person narrative where there's no like I, and it's like kind of like this view where you're reading about each of the individual characters, but they just weren't likable to me. So this book was meant to be a commentary on, I guess, tokenism. So the way that white people around this black female character would use her as a way to make themselves feel better, or feel like they're not racist because they are acquainted with her in some way. And you see a little bit in the character's boyfriend at the time, who, again, another character, I just didn't like him at all. Her employer as well, who was really weird. She did a lot of weird things that you would not expect an employer to do. And then she had like these 2 kids, one who she completely ignored. And there was no point where there was a resolution to any of this. It just kept going. I did not like this. I'll stop there. I'll stop bashing the book there, but I cannot recommend this. It surprises me that it made it this far into like I know it's on one of the final books for the Goodreads choice, but I gotta say, I think it was in a debut novel, and I chose The Henna Artist instead, and I gotta say that book is like 1,000 times better than Such a Fun Age was. The third book on my list is Normal People, which is another popular one. I will say I didn't hate Normal People as much as I hated Such a Fun Age and Nevernight. So let me calm down a little bit. But Normal People was another book where I felt the same way as I did about Such a Fun Age. It felt like there was just no point to the book. So the book follows these two main characters. They start off in high school, and then it also follows them as they begin college. And they have this weird romantic relationship where one is kind of just taking advantage of the other and like trying to hide her from, or hide their relationship. And then the roles reverse when they get to college, where the girl, she becomes the popular one, and then the guy, Connell was his name, he's not so much. And they're still doing this thing where they can't decide whether they want to be with one another. And this is the entire book, and in the end, it's still like nothing's clear. I feel like nothing has gotten better over the course of like the 4 or 5 years, I think it was, that the story follows their lives. And then to top it all off, I don't think the characters, again, were particularly likable. I know that Normal People is very highly touted as like a book of the generation, but I just don't see it that way. Maybe if we're talking about current high schoolers, but even then, like, some of my high schoolers are way more mature than these two characters were made out to be in this book, to be frankly honest. This was another one that I considered DNFing while reading and stuck it out and was not really rewarded by the ending of the book. Fourth on my list is going to be Fix Her Up. And this was a rather recent read. I think I had read this a month or two ago. I have talked about it on BookTube in one of my wrap-ups. And Fix Her Up it's a contemporary romance, but the problem with this book is that it is a contemporary romance that features the male main lead as this very like aggressive and jealous, bordering on, in my opinion, a masochistic guy that I'm not a huge fan of. Some people have rated this book very highly. Like, I've seen some of the romance booktubers talk about it and they really enjoy it. I don't think that it was my favorite work by this author. I've only read 2 of her books, and the other one, which was Love Her or Lose Her, I thought was okay. I enjoyed that one. But this one, Fix Her Up, not so much at all. And it's all because of the male character. I think it may have taken some aspects of his character just a little bit too far. And that's why that book is on this list. And in the final book, just to pick a 5th one to round off, I don't feel as strongly negatively toward this book as I did the other 4 on this list. But this wasn't a book that really wowed me this year. And this is called What We Were Promised by Lucy Tan. And this came from my public library. It was in one of the surprise bags. I think it was the BIPOC bag. Can't entirely remember. I picked like 3 of them up. But this book follows, it's another case, and I'm starting to see the pattern in these books that I don't like, where there are these very long narratives that don't seem to go anywhere. There seems to be no plot driving these books, and maybe that's why the genres that I tend to read are things like mystery, thriller, fiction, or mystery, thriller, romance, and fantasy. All of those, or nonfiction, all of those genres have some sort of conclusion. There's a plot driving them along, and that's what I enjoy about the books. This one in particular, very similar to the other ones that I mentioned, it follows a family who, they are this wealthy Chinese family. They grew up poor, they moved to America and came back to China and now work in, I think it was Shanghai. They live in a super fancy hotel, and then there's also a maid that works for them. And it follows the maid along with the husband and wife of the family. Now, there is actually a semblance of a plot here, because we discovered that the wife and the husband's brother had some sort of affection for one another. And then the husband's brother comes, and we're gonna see how that ends. The problem is that the way that it ends wasn't great. It felt like she just revealed what happened, and then suddenly no one cared about it. Within like a page almost. It's like it was revealed, no one cares about it, we're all just gonna go about our way, which was really weird. And the reveal itself wasn't really worth the entire book that led up to it, because this was a fairly long book. The audiobook was over 10 hours, and that's usually what I place as being rather long. And I actually listened to most of it on audiobook. My favorite part about this book was just the scenery, the way that she was describing the scenery in Shanghai. And considering the number of characters in this book, if that was my favorite part, that doesn't speak very highly of the book. I think I gave it 2 stars. Like I said, it wasn't totally awful, not as bad as some of the other books on this list, but it wasn't the greatest book that I read. All right, guys, that rounds up the list of the 5 worst books that I read in 2020. I'm actually pretty happy with the fact that I can only really point to 4 that I have like a strong hatred toward. And then the 5th book was like, it was okay. It wasn't great. I will not recommend it, and it's probably very forgettable. But all the other books that I read this year, I feel like I enjoyed them pretty well. So 5 out of 100 plus, that's pretty awesome. Let me know in the comment section if there were any books that you read this year that you feel as strongly about as I did for some of these books in this video. And in the meantime, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.